You ever have one of those weeks where your heart beats so fast you start to wonder if maybe it's trying to run away before you do? That was me, standing in a tiny kitchen that reeked of burnt toast and lavender dish soap, pretending I wasn't falling apart. My 5-year-old Emily sat cross-legged on the couch in her princess pajamas, talking to her stuffed giraffe about the balloon she'd begged me to buy that morning. The balloon was red, too bright for the gray walls of this broken city, too happy for someone like me. I was rinsing dishes, watching the sunlight fall across the counter, when Emily shouted, "Mommy, it's flying away!" Before I could even look, the balcony door creaked open, the one I told her not to touch, and there it went. That stupid red balloon floating past the railing, lifting her name written in my shaky handwriting. Emily Grace. Higher and higher until it disappeared into someone else's world. "It's gone," I said quietly. Emily's face crumpled. That raw, fragile grief only a child can have. But Mommy, it had my name. "I'll get you another one, sweetheart. It won't be the same." And she was right. Nothing ever was. I reached for her, but then 3 sharp knocks hit the door. Not quick, not casual, slow, heavy, intentional. Something inside me froze. I hadn't told anyone where we lived. Not since we left Chicago. Not since I packed our lives into 2 suitcases and promised Emily this time it'd be different. "Stay here," I whispered, pressing her small hand to my leg. I stepped to the door, my pulse doing somersaults. When I opened it, there he was, tall, dressed in black slacks and a half-buttoned white shirt, sleeves rolled up, the faintest edge of a tattoo curling from under his wristwatch. His dark hair fell messily across his forehead, but his eyes, gray, sharp, and unreadable, landed on me like he already knew me. In his hand, the red balloon. "This yours?" His voice was low, deep, steady, the kind that hums through the walls long after the sound's gone. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I just stared. He was the kind of man you felt before you understood, the kind that makes you forget the room you're standing in. I nodded. "Yeah, my daughter's." He glanced past me. "Cute kid." Emily peeked around my leg. His expression softened. Not much, but enough to make me wonder if there was a man under the steel. "She shouldn't play near balconies," he said. Something in his tone made me straighten. "We're careful." "Good," he said, tying the balloon string around her tiny wrist. "Keep her close. Not every neighbor's friendly." Then, with no goodbye, he turned and disappeared down the hall. I stood there long after the door shut, my heart sprinting, my head full of static. There was no reason for a man like that to bring back a balloon. That night, when Emily was asleep, I stood on our narrow balcony with a cup of coffee gone cold. The city lights looked blurred, smeared like wet paint. Above me, I heard a lighter flick. I looked up. He was there, on the balcony right above mine, leaning against the railing, smoke curling from his cigarette. He said, without looking down, "You don't sleep much, do you?" I startled. "You always watch your neighbors?" "Only the ones who look like they're thinking too loud." My mouth twitched despite myself. "Maybe I just have insomnia. Maybe you have ghosts." He exhaled smoke. "They're louder at night." The wind carried his voice down to me, slow and smooth, each word sinking under my skin. "You think I'm haunted?" I asked. He tilted his head, and for the first time our eyes met, his gaze steady, dissecting. "No. I think you're running from something that isn't finished yet." My throat tightened. I looked away. He chuckled softly. "Don't worry. I'm not judging. I don't sleep much either." And then, in the quiet between us, I asked, "Who are you?" He took a drag, then said, "Someone who prefers quiet neighbors." His name, I would learn later, was Adrian Moretti. But that night I didn't ask. I just went inside and locked every window twice. The next morning, a white envelope lay under my door. Inside was a single business card, black lettering, A. Moretti, a number scrawled beneath it. I told myself to throw it away. Instead, I hid it in the kitchen drawer next to Emily's crayons. That afternoon, the world tilted again. I was walking home from the market with Emily's small hand clutching mine when a black car slowed beside us, The windows were tinted, but I could feel eyes watching. My pulse climbed. The car rolled another 10 feet, stopped, then sped off. I told myself it was nothing. By the time we reached our building, my hands were shaking too hard to get the key in the door. When it finally turned, I almost cried with relief, until I looked up and saw him again. Adrian stood at the end of the hallway, leaning against the wall, one hand in his pocket. Like he'd been waiting. "You should have called," he said. "What?" "The men in the car. You noticed them." My chest locked up. "You were watching me?" He stepped closer. "I was making sure you got home safe." "That's creepy?" he offered, smirking slightly. "Yeah, I get that a lot." I hated how he made me feel. Seen, cornered. "Safe, all at once. You're paranoid," I said. "Or maybe I know the streets better than you do." His tone shifted then, low. "Serious. Don't go out alone again. And if someone knocks who isn't me, don't answer." I should have told him to mind his own business. Instead, I asked, "Why are you helping me?" He studied me for a long time, then said, "Because someone helped me once. And because your kid looks like she deserves a mother who lives to see her grow up." That line broke something open inside me. He turned to leave and I blurted, "Wait, who are you really?" He looked over his shoulder, that faint half-smile returning. "You'll call the number when you're ready." Then he was gone. That night, I lay awake next to Emily, listening to the hum of the city outside our window. My phone sat on the nightstand, the card beside it like a dare. I told myself I wouldn't call, that I didn't need anyone, that men like him only saved you so they could own you. But just before dawn, when the shadows crept long across the walls and I felt that familiar wave of dread, I reached for the phone anyway. It rang once, twice. Then his voice. "I was waiting for you." I froze. "You don't even know my name." "I don't need to." A pause. "I know your fear. It sounds the same in everyone. I shouldn't be talking to you. Probably not. But you are." Something in his voice, steady, unhurried, cut straight through the noise in my head. I closed my eyes, pressing the phone to my ear like it could keep me safe. "Who are those men in the car?" I whispered. "The kind you run from," he said. "The kind who don't stop until someone bigger tells them to." "And that's you?" His silence was answer enough, then softer. "I can keep you safe if you let me." I hesitated. "Why?" "Because you remind me what it's like to want something worth saving." I didn't sleep that night. I just stared at the ceiling, listening to my daughter's quiet breathing, wondering what I'd just stepped into. The next morning, the red balloon still floated above her bed, bright against the shadows. And I realized, some doors, once opened, don't close again. That was the day I stopped pretending I was invisible. That was the day I let danger call me by name. When Adrian told me to pack a bag, I should have hung up. I should have grabbed Emily, run again, vanished into another city where no one knew us. But I was tired. Tired of running, tired of scraping together rent, tired of pretending my fear wasn't breathing down our necks. So instead of saying no, I asked, "Where are we going?" He said, "Somewhere no one will find you." And then he hung up. That's how men like him speak. Not in explanations, in orders. An hour later, his black car idled outside my building. Emily clutched her stuffed giraffe, half asleep against my shoulder as I buckled her into the back seat. Adrian didn't say a word. He just drove. The city lights bled away until there was nothing but dark roads and the hum of the engine. Every few minutes I'd glance at him, the way his hands gripped the wheel, calm and unhurried. Like danger didn't scare him. Like nothing did. "Where are we going?" I asked again. He glanced at me. "You'll see. I don't like surprises. I don't give them. I give protection." I looked out the window. "That's supposed to make me feel safe?" He gave a low laugh, almost to himself. "No one feels safe around me, but they should feel alive." The road curved along a stretch of cliffs before the car slowed and stopped in front of a gated estate. Massive, silent, and surrounded by glass walls that caught the faint glow of the moon. The gate opened without a sound. When we pulled up to the front steps, I realized the house was more fortress than home. Cameras, guards, iron, and silence. He killed the engine, turned to me and said, "You'll stay here until I say otherwise." "I can't." He looked at me then, and I shut up. "This isn't a request," he said quietly. "Someone's looking for you. You move again, I can't help." "How do you even know that?" "Because they called me." My heart slammed. "Who?" He stepped out of the car and didn't answer. Inside, the house felt like walking into someone else's secrets. Cold marble floors, high ceilings, art that looked expensive enough to buy the building we left behind. He led us to a guest room with 2 beds and a view of the ocean. "This'll do," he said. Emily blinked up at him sleepily. "Are you a police?" He crouched down to her level. "Something like that, little one." "Do you catch bad guys?" "Only the ones who need catching." She nodded solemnly, satisfied. He looked at me. "Get some rest." I wanted to tell him I didn't trust him, that this whole thing felt like walking into a trap. But instead I said, "Thank you." He gave me that same unreadable look. "Don't thank me yet." The next morning, sunlight spilled across the room, soft and golden. Emily was sitting by the window, tracing hearts in the fog on the glass. For a brief second, it felt almost normal. Then I heard voices downstairs, low, sharp, male. I stepped into the hallway just as Adrian appeared at the top of the stairs. His shirt was half-buttoned, hair damp, eyes cold. "Stay upstairs," he said. "Who's here?" "No one you need to meet." I didn't listen. I never do. From the landing, I could see 3 men in dark suits standing by the door. One of them held a file in his hand. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught enough. My name. A location. The word debt. Adrian's tone was low but final. "She's under my protection. That's all you need to know." The man with the file sneered. "Protection? Since when do you play bodyguard? Since she became my problem." "Moretti, you don't even—" He moved faster than I could blink. 1 second the man was talking. The next he was pinned against the wall, Adrian's hand wrapped around his throat. "Walk away," Adrian said, calm as ice. "Before I forget I'm supposed to be civil." They left. When he turned and saw me on the stairs, something flickered in his expression. "You like eavesdropping?" "You brought me into this," I said. "I deserve to know what this is." He climbed the stairs slowly until we were eye to eye. "This is the part where you start trusting me." I don't even know what that means anymore. He studied me for a long moment. "Then start with this. Don't open doors, don't answer calls, and never go outside without me." "They'll come for you through her next." My stomach twisted. "Through Emily?" He nodded once. "That's how your ex's people work." The name caught in my throat. "You know about him?" "I know he borrowed money from the wrong men. And when he couldn't pay, he gave them something worse. Your location." My knees went weak. I grabbed the railing to steady myself. He reached out, almost like he might catch me if I fell, but he stopped halfway. "You're safe here," he said softly, "but only if you listen." Days turned into weeks inside that glass house. Emily adjusted faster than I did. She liked the ocean view, the garden where she could run, the little white dog that followed her everywhere. Me, I was unraveling. Adrian was gone most days, meetings, calls, always dressed like sin and control, black dress shirts, sleeves rolled up, tie loose around his neck. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at me across the room, his expression unreadable, and I'd feel that electric current hum under my skin. One night, after putting Emily to bed, I found him in the kitchen pouring whiskey. The air between us buzzed like a live wire. "You don't sleep much either," I said quietly. He looked at me over the rim of the glass. "You watch people when they sleep?" I shrugged. "Only the interesting ones." That pulled a faint smirk from him. "You always joke when you're scared?" He asked. "It keeps me from falling apart." He leaned back against the counter. "You don't have to hold it together all the time." "Then who would?" His gaze softened, just a flicker. "I would." The room went still. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator and the pounding of my heart. "You shouldn't say things like that," I whispered. "Why not?" "Because I might believe you." He set the glass down and stepped closer. "Then believe me, I don't know who moved first. All I remember is his hand brushing mine, his breath near my cheek, that moment where the world shrank to the space between us. Then, footsteps. Emily's voice down the hall. "Mommy?" We both froze. I stepped back, my chest aching. "She has nightmares," I said quietly, almost apologizing. He nodded once. "Go." When I came back, he was gone. 2 nights later, everything burned again. I woke to shouting outside, men's voices, rough, urgent. I grabbed Emily and ran to the hallway. Adrian was already there, gun in hand, eyes sharp. "Stay behind me," he said. "What's happening?" "They found us." The sound of glass shattering echoed through the house. Emily screamed. Adrian fired once, twice. I pressed her face into my shoulder, heart slamming against bone. Then silence. When I looked up, the intruders were gone. Or unconscious. I didn't know which. Adrian was bleeding from his arm. I reached for him. "You're hurt." He brushed me off. "It's nothing. That's not nothing." He turned to me, voice low and rough. "You want to help me? Keep her safe." So I did. I sat on the floor with Emily in my lap, whispering that everything was fine, that Mommy had it handled, even as I watched Adrian stagger to the window, blood dripping onto the marble. When it was over, when the house fell silent again, he leaned against the wall, breathing hard. I knelt beside him, pressing a towel to his arm. "You're going to need stitches," I said. He caught my wrist, eyes locking on mine. "You're shaking. So are you." He smiled faintly. "Guess we make a good pair?" I hated that he made me laugh then. I hated that my heart still found space for warmth in the middle of fear. When I finished bandaging him, I whispered, "Why are you doing this for me?" He hesitated. "Because once someone did it for me, and I couldn't save them." "Who?" He looked away. "My sister." Something in his voice cracked. Not loud, just enough to make me ache for him. "Adrian," I said softly. He shook his head. "Don't, go check on your daughter." But I couldn't move. "You saved us." He met my gaze. "No, not yet." The next morning the house felt too quiet. The guards were gone. The glass walls glimmered like nothing had happened. And Adrian, he was gone too. On the table, a note in his handwriting. "Don't leave the house." "They're not finished." My hands trembled as I read it. Emily tugged on my sleeve, pointing to the window. Outside, a single red balloon floated just beyond the glass, tied to the balcony railing. I knew he left it, and somehow, I knew he might not come back. It's strange how quiet the world becomes after chaos. You start hearing things again. The hum of the refrigerator, the ocean whispering outside the windows, your own heartbeat not pounding for once. After that night, the one where blood hit marble and fear smelled like gunpowder, the house turned into something else entirely. Not a prison, not yet home, just a space between before and after. Adrian didn't come back the next day. Or the next. At first, I told myself he was handling things, calling his men, fixing what was broken, doing whatever it is men like him do when they need to erase blood from the floor. But the longer the silence stretched, the more it started to feel like abandonment. Emily asked every morning, "Is he gone for work?" And I'd say, "Yes, baby." I didn't have the heart to tell her I didn't know if he was ever coming back. I filled the days with routine. Breakfast, cartoons, walks in the enclosed garden when the guards said it was safe. The housekeeper, an older woman named Rosa, kept to herself, speaking in quiet tones, always watching me like she knew what kind of man her boss really was. Sometimes at night, I'd hear the ocean waves crash hard against the rocks and imagine him somewhere out there, driving too fast, bleeding again, making choices that would get him killed. I told myself I hated him for leaving. But the truth was uglier. I missed him. I missed the way his voice steadied the air around me, how he could make fear sound like a challenge instead of a sentence. I missed feeling like someone saw me, not as a broken mother or a fleeing ex-wife, but as a woman who still had fire left in her. A week later, the phone rang, not my phone, the landline in the hallway. the one Adrian told me never to touch. The sound cut through the house like a blade. I froze, staring at it. It rang again and again. I picked it up. A voice, low and unfamiliar, said, "You're harder to find than he said you'd be." My throat went dry. "Who is this?" A soft chuckle. "You don't know me, sweetheart, but I know your husband. I don't have a husband. Maybe not now. But your ex sure made promises he couldn't keep." My heart sank. "What do you want?" "What's owed?" Then, click, the line went dead. I didn't wait. I grabbed Emily, threw her coat over her pajamas, and ran to the front door. But before I could reach it, the locks clicked. Automatically. The house sealed itself. The security system engaged. And that's when I realized Adrian hadn't left me unprotected. He'd locked me in. I slammed my hand against the glass. "Open!" No response. Emily was crying now, clinging to my leg. "Mommy, I'm scared." I knelt, cupping her face. "It's okay. We're safe here." But I wasn't sure I believed that anymore. I took her upstairs into the room with the ocean view and closed the curtains. And then I saw it. A black car pulling up the long driveway. Not Adrian's. 3 men stepped out, dressed like shadows moving with purpose. My chest constricted. I didn't know where the guards were, maybe gone, maybe dead. But whoever these men were, they weren't here for conversation. I grabbed the phone and hit redial. Praying to God the line went somewhere. It rang once, then his voice. "Tell me what's happening," Adrian said. 3 men. "The gate. Stay where you are," he cut in. "Don't move. Don't open the door and keep her out of sight." "Adrian, what if I'm already on my way?" The line went dead again. The minutes stretched into hours. Every sound made me flinch. The creak of the walls, the rush of the wind. Emily fell asleep clutching her giraffe, her face pressed to my chest. I stayed still, listening, waiting. Then, finally, headlights cut across the glass walls. Tires screeched, voices outside, shouting, gunfire, the kind of chaos I'd only ever seen in nightmares. I didn't move. Couldn't. The noise went on forever, or maybe just a few minutes. And then silence, footsteps in the hall. I grabbed the nearest object, a lamp, and raised it like a weapon. The door opened. And there he was, Adrian, his shirt torn, blood smeared across his jaw, eyes darker than I remembered. "It's over," he said quietly. The lamp slipped from my hand. "You're hurt. I've been worse. You shouldn't have come back." He stepped closer. "You think I'd leave you here?" My throat closed up. I wanted to yell, to hit him, to tell him he had no right to make me feel safe just to disappear again. But all I could do was whisper, "You promised you'd keep her safe." He looked at Emily asleep in my arms, then at me. And I did. Something in his voice cracked then, not weakness, just weariness. The kind that comes from too much fighting and too little peace. I said, "They'll come again." "No," he said, shaking his head. "Not anymore. What did you do?" He hesitated. "The debt's paid. I didn't ask how. I didn't want to know." For a few weeks after that, life moved slowly. We didn't leave the house. Adrian stayed close, always in motion, always watching, like the whole world could collapse if he looked away for too long. But he laughed more. Not loud, not often, but real. He'd sit with Emily at breakfast, pretending to hate her cartoons while secretly smiling when she wasn't looking. Sometimes I'd catch him in the kitchen late at night, pouring coffee instead of whiskey. When I'd walk in, he'd glance up, smirk, and say, "Still not sleeping?" And I'd reply, "Still pretending you do?" The space between us grew smaller each day. Until one night, it disappeared completely. We were sitting on the balcony, the ocean stretching out endless and black, the sky full of stars. Emily was asleep. Rosa gone for the night. He said quietly, "You ever think about what you'll do when you stop running?" I didn't answer. I just stared at the sea, he went on. "People like us, we only know how to survive. But I keep thinking maybe that's not enough anymore." "What are you saying?" "That I want to try living." He turned to me then, and for the first time, his eyes weren't guarded. With you. If you'll let me. My chest ached. You don't even know who I am. I know enough. I wanted to tell him no. That people like us don't get happy endings, we get warnings. But the truth came out before I could stop it. I'm tired of being afraid. He reached for my hand, fingers brushing mine. Then stop being afraid with me. So I did. That night, I let him hold me. Not as a protector, not as a savior, just a man who'd seen my worst and stayed anyway. Months passed. The house didn't feel like glass anymore. It felt like something rebuilt, fragile, but real. Emily was thriving. New school, new friends, her laughter echoing through hallways that once held only echoes of fear. As for me, I stopped checking the locks every 5 minutes. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since before my ex turned our life into a war zone. Adrian never said much about his business, but I could see the difference in him. The calm, the quiet. He wasn't the man I met with blood on his hands and walls around his heart. He was gentler now. Not soft, but grounded, and sometimes, when the sun hit the windows just right, he'd look at me and say, "You don't flinch anymore." "I'm learning," I'd reply. It's been a year since that night. Emily still keeps the red balloon, deflated now, tied to her bedpost. She says it's lucky. I think maybe she's right. Sometimes I tell myself I should leave. That people like Adrian don't get forever. They get borrowed time. But then he'll walk into the room, shirt half undone, coffee in hand, and give me that look, the one that says stay, without words, and I know I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. He once told me everyone has one story they swore they'd never tell. This is mine. It's not about danger or crime or redemption. It's about a man who found my daughter's balloon and gave it back with a warning that sounded like a promise. He didn't save me. Not really. He reminded me I could save myself. And in the ruins of everything I used to be, he built something steady, something almost like peace. We're not perfect. We still argue. He still works too late. I still lock the doors twice out of habit. But when he kisses me goodnight, I know we made it. Maybe not untouched, but alive. And that after everything feels like enough. If you've made it this far, you already know. Love like this doesn't come wrapped in safety. It comes with scars, silence, and second chances you never thought you'd take. If her story stayed with you, hit subscribe. Because more stories like this one are waiting. Stories whispered in the dark, about women who survived, and men who learned to love them right. Turn on the bell, stay close. The next confession starts soon.
Catherine lived in a world of quiet sounds. The gentle tap of her fingers on her laptop keyboard was her favorite song. The soft rustle of pages turning in a book was her preferred noise. Her apartment was a place of perfect order, where every cushion was plumped and every surface was clean and clear. She was a woman who arranged her life like a library, everything in its correct and proper place. This control made her feel safe. It was the one thing she could always count on. Her job was to fix other people's words, to tidy up their messy stories and make them neat and proper for the world to read. She was very good at it. She was less good at people, especially men. The men she met on dates were always fine. They were like plain toast. They were there, they served a purpose, but they were not interesting or exciting. They never made her feel anything. They would talk about their jobs or their cars, and Catherine would sit there, already editing their sentences in her head, making them better, more concise, more logical. She had decided long ago that love was a story she was just not meant to be in. She was the editor, not the main character. She told herself she was happy this way. It was better to be alone and peaceful than to be with someone and feel lonely. Her best friend Sarah did not agree. Sarah was always trying to pull Catherine out of her quiet world. Sarah lived in color and noise, and she was constantly worried that Catherine lived in a black and white silent movie. "You just haven't met the right one," Sarah would say for what felt like the 1,000th time. "You're looking for a man who doesn't exist. No one is that perfect." Catherine would just smile a small, tight smile and change the subject. She wasn't looking for perfect. She was just looking for someone who didn't make her want to go home after 5 minutes. Sarah's latest attempt to rescue Catherine from her own life was a party. A big, loud Friday night party at a friend's loft apartment. "It will be fun," Sarah had insisted, her voice buzzing with excitement over the phone. There will be music and great food and interesting people. Catherine had agreed not because she wanted to go, but because it was easier than arguing. She knew Sarah's persistence was a force of nature. So, she put on a simple, elegant black dress, the kind that was appropriate but promised nothing, and went. The party was everything she feared. The music was a pounding beat that she could feel in her teeth. The air was thick with the smell of perfume and spilled wine. Bodies were everywhere, a swirling, laughing mass of noise and movement. Catherine felt a familiar anxiety curl in her stomach. She found a small, slightly darkened archway near a large bookcase that offered a view of the room without requiring her to be in it. It became her safe harbor. She held a glass of sparkling water, watching the chaos like it was a nature documentary. This was where she first heard him. A laugh, loud and full and real, cut through the generic party chatter like a lightning bolt. It was a laugh that seemed to take up all the space in the room. Her eyes, almost against her will, tracked the sound. He was standing in the center of a small group, a man with messy brown hair and a shirt that looked like it had been chosen for its comfort, not its style. He was telling a story, his hands painting pictures in the air. He wasn't just talking, his whole body was involved. He would lean in to make a point, then throw his head back with that laugh again. The people around him were captivated, their faces lit up with smiles. Catherine observed him with a critic's eye. Too animated, she thought. Trying too hard to be the center of attention. She labeled him in her mind, the life of the party. Exhausting. And then, as if he could feel her critical gaze from across the room, he turned. His eyes, a warm, lively brown, met hers. Catherine quickly looked down at her glass, a flush of embarrassment warming her cheeks. When she looked up again, he was smiling directly at her. And then, to her horror, he was excusing himself from his group and walking straight toward her. Her safe harbor was being invaded. Hiding? He asked, his voice as warm and lively as his eyes. It wasn't a smooth, practiced line. It was just a simple, direct question. Catherine stiffened. Just observing, she said, her own voice sounding terribly small and quiet next to his. I'm William, he said, not offering a hand, just beaming at her as if finding her in this corner was the best thing that had happened all night. Catherine, she replied. And then the flood began. He asked her a dozen questions in 1 minute. What did she do? Did she like parties? Had she tried the little meatballs that were being passed around? What was the last book she read that she really loved? He didn't wait for full answers. One thought led to another, a rushing river of words and energy. Catherine, who was used to careful, measured conversations, was completely overwhelmed. She gave short, polite answers, building a wall with her words. Yes, no, it's fine. A novel. She was trying to signal as clearly as she could that she was not interested in being part of his whirlwind. But William didn't seem to get the signal, or if he did, he chose to ignore it. He didn't seem annoyed by her quietness. Instead, he looked intrigued. He leaned a shoulder against the bookcase, his energy calming just a fraction as he really looked at her. You know, he said, his voice dropping to a tone that was just for her, most people at a party like this are like fireworks. All noise and flash and then they're gone. He paused, his gaze steady. But you're different. You're like a deep, still lake on a quiet morning. It makes a guy want to be quiet too, just to see what's under the surface. Catherine's breath caught in her throat. No one had ever said anything like that to her. Men usually told her she was pretty or smart or asked why she was so quiet. They tried to label the box they thought she belonged in. William wasn't trying to put her in a box. He was acknowledging the depth he sensed, and he wasn't scared of it. He was curious. The wall she had been building so carefully felt a little less solid. For the first time all night, she looked at him, really looked at him, not as a noisy interruption but as a person. She saw the intelligence in his eyes, the genuine warmth in his smile. He wasn't performing for her. This was just him. When he asked for her number, her brain screamed a dozen reasons why it was a bad idea. He was chaos. He was messy. He was everything her quiet, orderly life was not. But her heart, which had been silent for so long, gave a single, strong, undeniable beat. And before her sensible mind could stop it, her voice was saying, okay, and she was reciting her digits. He grinned, a brilliant, triumphant thing, and typed them into his phone. I'll call you tomorrow, Catherine the Lake, he said, and with a final happy wink, he melted back into the crowd, leaving her standing in the archway, her quiet world forever disrupted, the ghost of his laugh still echoing in the air around her. The phone call came precisely as promised the next afternoon. Catherine's phone had buzzed on her pristine coffee table, a minor earthquake in her silent apartment, and William's name had flashed on the screen. Her first instinct, honed by years of self-preservation, was to let it go to voicemail, to retreat into the safety of the known. But her finger, seemingly with a mind of its own, had swiped to answer. His voice was just as she remembered, a warm, vibrant baritone that filled the quiet spaces of her living room, and he didn't bother with small talk about the weather. He launched directly into an idea. "There's a place that does a pottery class on Tuesdays," he said as if they were already in the middle of a conversation. "You get to make a terrible, lopsided mug and then they fire it in a kiln so you have to keep it forever as a monument to your failure. What do you say?" It was the absolute opposite of the sophisticated wine bar dates she was accustomed to. It was messy and silly and completely undignified. And so, against every logical bone in her body, she found herself saying yes. That first date set the template for all that followed. William was a tour guide to a world Catherine had only ever observed from behind a pane of glass. He took her to a chaotic street food festival where they ate spicy noodles from a cardboard carton, the sauce threatening to drip onto their clothes. He dragged her on a sunrise hike, her neat hiking boots getting coated in mud, and he stopped every 5 minutes to point out a weird-shaped mushroom or a bird's nest tucked into the crook of a tree. He filled her quiet life with a symphony of new sounds, the squelch of mud, the sizzle of a food truck grill, his own unrestrained laughter. Catherine, who planned her weeks in color-coded calendars, found herself surrendering to the delightful anarchy of his spontaneity. She began to see that his too much energy wasn't a performance. It was a genuine, uncontainable passion for the simple experience of being alive. He didn't just see the world, he tasted it, he felt it, he reveled in it. And slowly, something inside of her began to unfurl, like a flower cautiously turning its face toward a persistent sun. She started to laugh, not the polite, measured chuckle she used in public, but a real, from-the-belly laugh that surprised her with its force. She found herself talking more, her sentences becoming less edited, her thoughts flowing freely in his presence. He listened to her with an intensity that was almost unnerving, his whole focus on her words as if she were revealing the secrets of the universe. He celebrated her small opinions as if they were major victories. In the warm, accepting glow of his attention, Catherine began to feel not like a spectator in her own life, but the main character. But old habits, especially those built for self-protection, die hard. The more she felt for him, the more terrifying the feeling became. This was uncharted territory, an emotional landscape with no map. One evening, after a perfect day spent wandering through a museum, they were back at her apartment. The comfortable silence between them was suddenly pierced by a sharp spike of fear in Catherine's chest. William was lounging on her sofa, looking completely at home, and the sight was somehow terrifying. Her sanctuary had been invaded, and worse, she had invited the invader in. The need to reassert control, to push him back to a safe distance, overwhelmed her. "You know," she began, her voice cool and critical, the voice she used with junior editors, "you always leave your jacket on the chair instead of hanging it in the closet. And you play your music just a little too loud in the car. It's a lot to handle." The words hung in the air, small and sharp. She was picking a fight, constructing a wall brick by brick with her criticisms. William, who had been smiling softly, went very still. The light in his eyes, usually so bright, dimmed. He didn't get angry or shout. The hurt that crossed his face was quiet and profound. He looked down at his hands, then back at her, his gaze clear and direct. "You think I'm too much, Catherine? You think I'm too loud, too messy, too much?" He took a slow breath. "Well, I think you're too afraid. You're so scared to feel anything that you've locked yourself in this beautiful, quiet prison. And you're trying to lock me out too." His words landed not as an attack, but as a devastating truth. He had seen right through her walls to the frightened heart of her. The fight drained out of her instantly, leaving behind a hollow ache of shame. They sat in a heavy, painful silence, the gulf between them feeling wider than ever. It was Catherine who broke it, her voice barely a whisper. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said, the words foreign and difficult on her tongue. "I am scared." William's posture softened. "I know," he said gently. "I get scared too. I'm scared that my too much will finally be too much for you. That one day you'll wake up and decide the quiet was better." In that moment of shared, raw honesty, the last of their defenses crumbled. They weren't a chaotic man and a controlled woman. They were just two people, terrified of being too much or not enough for the person they were falling for. He moved from the sofa to sit beside her on the floor, leaning against it, his shoulder brushing hers. The physical space between them vanished. He didn't try to kiss her right away. Instead, he just looked at her, his eyes tracing the features of her face as if memorizing them. He reached out and tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear, his touch incredibly gentle. "You are the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "And not just like this. All of you. The quiet parts and the parts you're still hiding." When their lips finally met, it was not a timid first kiss. It was a conversation, an answer to all the unspoken words between them. It was a surrender and a claiming all at once. Catherine's carefully maintained control shattered completely. Her hands, usually so still, came up to tangle in his hair, pulling him closer. His arms wrapped around her, holding her not like something fragile, but like something essential, something he would never let go. The kiss was deep and searching, full of a passion she never knew she possessed. It was spicy with the heat of their confessed fears and the fierce joy of their connection. It led them from the floor to her bedroom, a tangle of limbs and whispered promises. In the intimacy that followed, there were no more walls. In the dim light of her room, surrounded by the ordered silence of her life, they created their own world of sound and sensation. Catherine was not quiet and William was not just loud. They were a perfect, harmonious duet. She discovered that the body of the man the world called too much was the exact shape her own had been waiting for. His passion didn't overwhelm her. It met her own, rising to meet it, matching it beat for beat. Later, as they lay tangled in her sheets, his breath warm against her neck, Catherine understood a fundamental truth. She hadn't been satisfied by any other man because she had been waiting for this one. She had been waiting for the one whose too much was exactly what she needed to finally feel whole. The world, of course, did not simply step aside to make room for their newfound happiness. Catherine and William now existed as a single, combined entity, a new country with its own private language and customs, but they still had to interact with the old nations that had raised them. Catherine's friends, the ones who appreciated fine wine and polite conversation, were baffled by William. At a quiet dinner party, his booming laugh would startle the delicate crystal glasses, and his habit of telling long animated stories with his hands would make them subtly inch their chairs back. Catherine would watch them, and for the first time she saw not their sophistication but their fear. They were afraid of his volume, his sheer, unedited presence. One of them, a woman named Isabel, pulled Catherine aside one evening, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "He's just so much, isn't he? Are you sure you're not exhausted?" In the past, Catherine would have wilted, agreeing with a silent, ashamed nod. But now a new, fierce loyalty burned within her. She met Isabel's gaze, her own steady and clear. "His much is what makes me feel alive," she stated, her voice leaving no room for argument. "His big love makes my quiet world brighter." William faced a similar trial with his own circle. His friends were used to a whirlwind, a man who floated freely from one adventure to the next, unattached and unburdened. Catherine's calm presence, her thoughtful silences, were misinterpreted. They saw her as a weight, an anchor trying to halt his glorious, wandering ship. One of his oldest buddies, clapping him on the back after a game of basketball, said, "She's great, man, really. But she's so serious. Like she's always thinking. Don't you miss just being able to be yourself?" William, who was still catching his breath, just smiled a soft, private smile. He looked over to where Catherine was waiting for him, a quiet, graceful figure holding a bottle of water. "You don't get it," he said, his voice filled with a certainty that surprised even him. "Her quiet love doesn't cage me. It's the port my ship has been trying to find my whole life. It's what makes me feel safe." In defending each other to their old worlds, they were building the foundations of their new one, brick by solid brick. Their life together became a beautiful, living compromise. Catherine's once impeccable apartment now bore the delightful scars of William's existence. A lopsided, comically terrible clay mug he had made sat proudly on her neat shelf, a stark contrast to her fine china. A vibrant, slightly messy abstract painting he had convinced her to create together hung on her wall, a splash of chaotic color against her neutral tones. His stray books and guitar picks were scattered among her orderly possessions, not as intrusions, but as welcome evidence of a life being fully lived. They had loud, impromptu dance parties in the living room, the music turned up high, and they had silent evenings where they simply read on opposite ends of the same sofa, their legs tangled together, speaking volumes without saying a word. They had learned the deepest secret of love. It wasn't about changing the other person to fit a mold, but about expanding the borders of your own soul to include them. William knew, with a certainty that felt as fundamental as gravity, that he wanted this expansion to be permanent. He wanted a lifetime of her quiet mornings and his loud laughs. He spent weeks planning not a grand public spectacle, but a moment that was purely, perfectly them. He took her back to the city park, to the very same quiet, hidden bench near the lake where they had once had one of their first long talks, where he had first seen her truly let her guard down and laugh until she cried. It was autumn, and the leaves were blazing with color, reflecting on the still, dark water of the lake. He didn't get down on one knee right away. He simply sat with her, holding her hand, talking about that first day, about how far they had come. He spoke of her strength, her patience, her mind that he found so endlessly fascinating. His voice was quiet, reverent, a side of him the rest of the world never saw. "You are my calm, Catherine," he whispered, his eyes glistening. "And you are my storm. You are the peace in my chaos and the beautiful chaos in my peace. You are my entire world." Then and only then, did he slide from the bench onto one knee and open a small velvet box. "Will you be my forever?" Catherine's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears that were not of sadness, but of a joy so profound it had to overflow. There was no hesitation, not a single moment of doubt. The woman who had once overanalyzed every decision simply let her heart speak. "Yes," she breathed the word of promise. 1,000 times yes. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, the last piece of her quiet world slid perfectly into place, not to close her off but to complete her. Years later, their home was a testament to their union. It was a place of beautiful, controlled chaos, where schedules were meant to be broken and quiet could be found in the middle of a celebration. They had built a life, a real one, with its share of arguments and making up, of hard days and glorious nights. They had learned that forever wasn't a single dramatic moment, but a collection of a million small ones. It was in the way he still brought her coffee in the morning, exactly how she liked it. It was in the way she still laughed at his jokes, even the ones she'd heard a dozen times. It was in the way they could sit in a comfortable silence that was louder and more full of love than any words could ever be. Catherine, the woman who had believed no man could ever truly know her or satisfy the deep, quiet longings of her soul, had been proven wonderfully, completely wrong. She had found her match not in a man who was less, but in the one who was more. She had been forever satisfied by the one the world had foolishly called too much, because his too much was and always would be exactly enough for her. If you were moved by Catherine and William's journey from lonely individuals to a complete, forever kind of love, if you believe in stories where too much meets not enough, and they discover they are a perfect fit, then you won't want to miss what comes next. Our channel is dedicated to bringing you tales of mature, passionate romance that explores the deepest connections between two souls. Subscribe now and join our community of hopeless romantics. Your next favorite story is waiting to be discovered, and you'll be the first to know when it arrives. Don't miss a single chapter of the love we have to share. The city outside the car window was a blur of sparkling lights, each one a tiny star stuck to the earth, but Serena saw none of it. Her hands, clasped tightly in her lap, were cold as ice. The expensive silk of her simple blue dress felt foreign against her skin, a costume for a part she never imagined playing. She was driving towards a new life, a life that was not her choice, but a necessary sacrifice. Her family was in deep, deep trouble, the kind of trouble that could erase everything they had ever known, and she was the only one who could stop it. The solution had been presented to her parents on a silver platter of legal documents and unthinkable promises. An arrangement. A marriage. But not a marriage to one man. A marriage to two. The car slid to a silent stop before a pair of immense wrought iron gates. They swung open without a sound, revealing a long, winding driveway that cut through a garden so perfect it looked like a painting. At the end of the driveway stood a house. It wasn't just a big house, it was a castle of glass and stone, modern and intimidating, with windows so large they seemed to swallow the night sky. This was the home of Cain and Cale, the billionaire twins. Men of immense power, mystery, and, according to the rumors, a shared taste for the unique. Serena took a shaky breath, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She was their new unique acquisition. A stern-faced woman in a crisp suit met her at the towering front door. Not a word was spoken as Serena was led through hallways that echoed with her own nervous footsteps. The inside of the house was all sharp angles, cold marble, and stunning art, but it felt empty, like a beautiful shell without a soul. They finally entered a room that was all warmth and shadow, a library with walls of books and a fireplace where real logs crackled and popped. "Wait here," the woman said, her voice as crisp as her suit, and then she was gone, leaving Serena utterly alone. Serena stood in the middle of the room, trembling. She was 19 years old and had never even been properly kissed. Her life had been one of quiet books, simple dreams, and helping in her father's small shop. The concept of love had always been a fuzzy, distant fantasy, something that happened to other people in movies. Now she was standing in a palace, waiting to meet the two men who were now her husbands, and the word virgin felt like a brand on her forehead. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to still the shaking. Then a door on the other side of the library opened. Two figures stepped through side by side, and Serena's breath caught in her throat. They were identical, and yet, from the very first second, she could tell them apart. They were both tall, with broad shoulders and faces so handsome it was almost painful to look at. But their energy was completely different. The one on the right had a slight, easy smile on his face. His eyes, a warm, friendly blue, crinkled at the corners as he looked her over. He was the first to move, stepping forward with a confident, graceful walk. "Serena," he said, and his voice was like warm honey, smooth and sweet. "I'm Kale. It's so wonderful to finally meet you. You're even more beautiful than we were told." His words were a comfort, a small life raft in her stormy sea of fear. Her eyes then drifted to the one on the left. King. He had not moved. He stood perfectly still, his arms crossed over his chest, his gaze fixed on her. His eyes were the same shade of blue as his brother's, but where Kale's were a sunny sky, Kane's were a deep, frozen lake. He studied her, not as a person but as a puzzle, taking in her fear, her wide eyes, the way she clutched her own arms. He didn't smile. The silence from him was heavier than all of Kale's charming words. Kale continued to talk, filling the tense air with pleasantries about the house, the weather, anything to put her at ease. He was trying, and a part of Serena was deeply grateful for it. But her attention was irrevocably pulled back to Kane. He was the storm and Kale was the calm. Finally, Kane uncrossed his arms and took a single, slow step forward. The room seemed to shrink. He was closer now, and she could feel the power radiating from him. "It's time we set the rules," Kane said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated deep in Serena's bones. It was not a loud voice, but it commanded absolute attention. Kale fell silent, his smile softening into something more serious. Kane's eyes never left Serena's. "You understand the arrangement. You are ours. Both of ours. There is no choosing." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the room. "The marriage is to both of us. Your life is with both of us. And your nights," he said, his gaze intensifying, "belong to both of us." He took one more step, now standing only a few feet from her. He was so close she could smell his scent, something clean and wild like the forest after rain. He leaned in slightly, and the world narrowed to just his frozen lake eyes. "You'll take both of us tonight." The statement was so blunt, so final, it stole the air from her lungs. There was no room for argument, no room for hesitation. It was a fact as solid as the marble floor beneath her feet. Her fate was sealed not with a question but with a decree. Later, after a silent, awkward dinner where Kale did most of the talking, Serena found herself being led by both men up a grand, curving staircase. Her heart was a frantic drum in her ears. They walked her not to a simple bedroom, but to a master suite that was larger than her entire family's apartment. The room was dominated by an enormous bed, and the sight of it made her legs feel weak. The brothers were different here in the privacy of the bedroom. The public masks were gone. Kale's charm became a more focused, tender warmth. Kane's stern silence became a potent, watchful intensity. They didn't rush. They stood before her, and Kale reached out first, his fingers gently brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "It's okay to be nervous, Serena," he whispered. "We will be gentle." Then Kane moved. He didn't speak. He simply lifted his hand and cupped the side of her face. His touch was not soft like Kale's, it was firm, possessive. His thumb stroked her jawline, and a shiver, hot and cold at the same time, shot down her spine. This was it. The moment of no return. Kale was the one to lean in and press his lips to hers. It was her first kiss. It was soft, exploring and sweet. It felt like she imagined a first kiss should feel, a little shy, a little curious. It made a warm flutter start in her stomach. But then as Kale pulled away, Kane was there. He tilted her face up towards his. "Now me," he said, his voice a husky command. His kiss was nothing like his brother's. It was not a question, it was an answer to a question she didn't even know she had asked. His lips were demanding, firm and hungry. He kissed her deeply, claiming her mouth until she was breathless and dizzy, her hands clutching his shoulders to keep from falling. They worked together, their movements synchronized from a lifetime of understanding each other. Kale unzipped her dress, his hands soft and encouraging, while Kane kept her focused on him with his intense gaze, his hands on her waist, holding her steady. The The silk dress pooled at her feet, and she stood before them in just her simple undergarments, feeling more exposed than she ever had in her life. But they didn't laugh or look disappointed. They looked hungry. Beautiful, Cale breathed, his eyes full of genuine awe. Cain just gave a slow, single nod, his gaze burning a trail over her skin. They led her to the bed, and the world became a haze of new sensations. The softness of the sheets, the heat of their bodies surrounding hers, the contrast of their touches. Cale's hands were patient and teaching, showing her where to touch, how a simple caress could make her gasp. Cain's hands were bolder, learning the curves of her body with a confident possessiveness that left her aching for more. They took turns kissing her, touching her, worshipping her body until the last of her fear was burned away, replaced by a rising, unfamiliar need. When the final moment came, when she was no longer a girl but a woman, it was Cale who was inside her, his body moving with a gentle rhythm, his whispers in her ear telling her she was perfect. But her head was turned, and her eyes were locked with Cain's. He was watching them, his expression a mix of fierce pride and raw desire, and he held her hand, his grip strong and anchoring. It was for him that she finally let out a soft cry, not of pain but of release, of surrender, of a strange and powerful beginning. As the night settled into a deep quiet, Serena lay in the enormous bed, nestled between the two powerful men who were now her husbands. Cale was already asleep on one side, his arm thrown gently across her waist. On her other side, Cain was awake, his body turned towards her, one hand resting on her hip as if to make sure she didn't float away. She was no longer a virgin. She was no longer just Serena. She was theirs. And as she closed her eyes, exhausted and overwhelmed, the last thing she felt was not regret, but a confusing, terrifying, and thrilling sense of belonging. The promise had been made, and her new life had truly begun. The morning sun streamed into the massive bedroom, painting golden stripes across the tangled sheets and the three sleeping forms. Serena awoke slowly, the events of the previous night returning to her not as a shocking dream, but as a heavy, warm reality. The space beside her was empty where Cale had been, but on her other side Cain's solid presence remained. He was already awake, propped on an elbow, just watching her. His frozen lake eyes were unreadable in the soft light. No good morning, no smile. Just a long, silent look that made her heart do a little flip before he finally rose from the bed without a word and disappeared into the bathroom. It was a pattern that would quickly become the new normal of her life. The days began to form a strange, beautiful rhythm within the walls of the glass and stone mansion. Serena was given everything she could possibly want. A wardrobe filled with clothes softer than clouds, a jewelry box that glittered with stones she had only ever seen in magazines, and the freedom to explore every corner of her new, sprawling home. But the most precious gifts came from her two husbands, and they could not have been more different. Cale was the sun. He was her guide, her friendly companion in this strange new world. He planned adventures for them. He took her flying in his private helicopter, holding her hand as they soared above the city, her delighted laughter mixing with the roar of the engine. He filled her afternoons with shopping sprees where he insisted on buying her anything that made her eyes light up, and long, lazy lunches where he made her tell him stories about her childhood, listening with a captivated smile. His affection was easy and open. He would kiss her in the hallway for no reason, his lips always soft and smiling. He would whisper how beautiful she was, how happy she made him, his words a constant, warm balm on her uncertain soul. Loving Cale was as simple and natural as breathing. It felt like the romance she had read about in books. Cain was the moon. He was distant, often disappearing into his home office for hours, the door closed firmly against the world. He spoke little during their shared meals, letting Cale fill the silence. He never bought her gifts. At first, Serena interpreted his silence as coldness, perhaps even regret about their arrangement. She felt a sting of rejection every time he walked past without looking at her. But slowly she began to notice things. Small, quiet things that spoke louder than any of Cale's grand gestures. She mentioned offhandedly one evening that she missed the simple hot chocolate her mother used to make, the kind with the tiny marshmallows. The next morning, a steaming mug of it, perfectly prepared, was waiting for her on the breakfast table. Cain was reading a newspaper, saying nothing, but she knew. When they were forced to attend a large, intimidating gala, Cale was her charming date, dancing with her and introducing her to everyone. But it was Cain who stood silently at the edge of the dance floor, a dark, watchful sentinel. When a stuffy older man crowded her a little too closely, it was Cain who appeared at her side in an instant, his mere presence making the man mumble an apology and retreat. He never said, "I will protect you." He just did it. And his touches. They were rare, but when they happened they burned. While Cale's hands were always gentle and seeking, Kane's were possessive and decisive. A firm hand on the small of her back, guiding her through a doorway. A strong grip on her wrist, pulling her gently to him for a sudden, deep kiss that left her breathless before he let her go and walked away. His love wasn't in his words, it was in his actions. It was a language of silent protection and intense, focused desire. This was the battle that began to rage inside Serena's heart. It was not a battle between good and evil, but between the sun and the moon. When she was with Cale, she felt happy, cherished, and light. It was easy and fun. But when Kane was in the room, even if he was silent in the corner, she was acutely aware of him. Her body thrummed with a nervous energy, a desperate need for him to look at her, to acknowledge her. His rare, intense kisses haunted her, feeling more real and profound than all of Cale's sweet affection. The nights were where the battle became most intense. In the darkness of their shared bedroom, the brothers' approaches were a perfect reflection of their daytime selves. Cale was a patient, tender lover, focused on her pleasure, his movements slow and worshipful. He made her feel adored. But when it was Kane's turn, the dynamic shifted into something darker, wilder, and more profound. He would look into her eyes as he touched her, his gaze holding hers captive. His kisses were not soft, they were claiming. His hands on her body were not asking, they were taking what was his, and in that taking, he made her feel a powerful, aching need she never knew she possessed. She began to crave that intensity, that feeling of being utterly consumed. She found herself turning to him in the dark, her body seeking his specific, demanding brand of affection. One afternoon she was in the garden with Cale and he was making her laugh with a funny story. It was a perfect, sunny moment. Then she glanced up and saw Kane watching them from his office window several floors up. He was just a silhouette, but she could feel his gaze. Her laughter died in her throat. In that moment, a terrifying thought crystallized in her mind. She was not just falling in love with both of them. She was in love with both of them. Deeply. Truly. But differently. She loved Cale like a best friend, a joyful partner. But she loved Kane with a desperate, hungry passion that felt like it was carved into her very soul. The confusion was a heavy weight on her chest. How could one heart hold two such different loves? Was it fair to Cale that her most passionate feelings were reserved for his brother? Was it fair to Kane that she also cherished Cale's easy warmth? She felt pulled in too, a rope in a silent tug-of-war between the twin sun and moon. She started to withdraw, becoming quieter, getting lost in her own thoughts. She saw the brothers exchange worried glances over her head. The beautiful, strange family they were trying to build felt fragile, like a glass vase teetering on the edge of a table, and she was terrified that her own conflicted heart was the thing that would finally send it shattering to the floor. The peace of the first few weeks was gone, replaced by the quiet, aching storm of a heart that did not know how to love two men without breaking itself in half. The tension in the beautiful glass house became a thick, heavy fog that everyone breathed but no one mentioned. Serena moved through the grand rooms like a ghost, her smiles at Cale's jokes a little too slow, her body tense and wary whenever Kane entered the space. She could feel the weight of their silent questions, their concern. Cale tried to lift her spirits with plans for a trip to Paris, with gifts of rare books he knew she would love. Kane simply watched her, his frozen lake eyes now shadowed with a frustration he would not voice. The distance between them felt like a canyon, and Serena stood on one side, while the two men she loved stood together on the other, and she had no idea how to build a bridge. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday. The three of them were in the library, the same room where they had first met. Cale was trying to engage her in a conversation about a new art exhibit. Kane was standing by the fireplace, his silence more deafening than the crackling logs. Serena, feeling the walls closing in, the guilt and confusion choking her, suddenly stood up. "I can't do this," she whispered, her voice trembling. Tears she had been holding back for weeks finally spilled over. "I'm so sorry." She turned to flee, but a strong hand caught her wrist. It wasn't Cale. It was Kane. He had crossed the room in 3 swift strides. "You can't do what, Serena?" he asked, his voice low and rough, demanding an answer she could no longer avoid. "This," she cried, gesturing wildly between him and Cale. I can't figure out my own heart. It's not fair to either of you. I love you both, but it's different and it's all wrong and I feel like I'm breaking." She sobbed, her shoulders shaking, all her composure gone. It was Cale who spoke next, his voice surprisingly gentle and understanding. "Serena, look at me." She turned her tear-streaked face to him. "Did you ever think that maybe it's supposed to be different?" he asked softly. We are not the same man. We are two different people who love the same woman. We don't expect you to love us in the same way." Cain's grip on her wrist softened, becoming a hold and anchor. "The only thing that is wrong," he said, his intense gaze boring into her, "is you trying to tear yourself in two. You are ours. Both of ours. Your heart is big enough for both of us because it is our heart. It belongs to this family. To the three of us." His words, so simple and so certain, sliced through all her confusion. They weren't asking her to choose. They were asking her to accept. To stop fighting the unique shape of their love. A wave of overwhelming relief washed over her, so powerful it made her knees weak. She looked from Cale's warm, accepting face to Cain's fiercely possessive one, and the battle inside her simply ended. She took a deep, shuddering breath, wiping her tears. "You are two halves of my one whole heart," she said, her voice gaining strength with each word. "I love Cale's laughter and I love Cain's quiet care. I don't want to choose. I choose both. I choose this family." What happened after that confession was a transformation. The fog in the house lifted, replaced by a brilliant, clear light. The brothers, freed from the fear of her choosing one over the other, opened their hearts to her completely. The love between the three of them deepened into something unshakable and forever. The spicy, tense moments in their bedroom melted into something even more powerful. Now, when they came to her, it was with a united front of adoration and a deep, soul-connecting passion. There was no more jealousy, no more silent competition. There was only the three of them, a perfect, balanced triangle of love and desire. Cale's tender worship taught her the beauty of intimacy, while Cain's fierce possession showed her the power of raw passion, and together, they made her feel like the most cherished, powerful woman in the world. Years flowed by like a gentle river. The giant glass house was no longer a cold castle but a warm, lived-in home, filled with the sound of laughter and little footsteps. Serena was no longer the scared girl who had arrived on the doorstep. She was a confident, radiant woman, secure in the love of her two husbands. She stood now in their sun-drenched garden, watching the scene that proved their love was not just real but enduring. Two little boys, one with Cale's sunny smile and the other with Cain's serious, dark eyes, were chasing a butterfly, their joyful shouts filling the air. Cale came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "They have your energy, my love," he whispered, kissing her neck. A moment later, Cain stood beside her, his presence a solid comfort. He didn't put his arm around her. Instead, his hand found hers, their fingers lacing together in a familiar, strong grip. He looked down at their joined hands, then at their children and finally at her. For the first time since she had met him, Serena saw his frozen lake eyes melt completely, filled with a love so deep and profound it needed no words. They were not two men and one wife anymore. They were one. One unique, unbreakable family. They had faced the world's confusion and their own doubts and had built a forever on their own terms. The sun and the moon no longer battled in her sky. They simply took turns shining down on their beautiful, complete world, a world built on a promise that one heart, when it is true and brave, is indeed big enough for two great loves. If you've been swept away by the unique and passionate love story of Cain, Cale, and Serena, and you want to discover more unforgettable romances that will make your heart pound and your soul believe in forever, then you absolutely cannot miss what comes next. Our channel is filled with tales of love that defies the ordinary, of hearts that find their missing pieces in the most unexpected ways. We have so many more stories to share with you, stories just waiting to become your new favorite escape. So do not miss a single one. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you are always the first to know when a new epic romance begins. Your next unforgettable love story is just one click away.